Hey, what's going on, y'all? My name is Q Oliver, and I'm going to talk about cameras for a second. I've been getting a lot of different questions on my blog, and there's one question that keeps coming up over and over again, and that question is, what camera should I buy? Now, that's a pretty broad question. There's a lot of different factors that go into that, but I know there's a lot of beginners out there, or even a lot of advanced users who might just be looking for a different setup. Now, because a lot of y'all know me as Film God, I'm going to just stick to talking about film cameras for this first episode, and maybe we'll get into some digital stuff later on. There's no real right or wrong answer to what camera you should buy. If you're trying to get into photography, just pick up a camera, find out what feels right to you, and start shooting. All a camera is a box that lets light in. So there's no difference between any one camera to another. There are some differences ergonomically, or you might just feel comfortable with a lighter setup or a more solid camera. This is completely all up to you. So I can't tell you what camera you should buy. I will make a couple of different suggestions based on what type of photography you might be doing. And that's the first thing you want to do, is figure out what exactly you're going to be shooting. So if you're a landscape photographer, you might use a different camera than somebody who's a street photographer. And if you're a portrait photographer, you might use a completely different setup than somebody who's a wedding photographer. My go-to camera is my Leica M6. Now, I'll say 80 to 85% of the work that you've seen me produce is with this camera. And I love it. It's very simple, and I get a lot of people that tell me, oh, film is too difficult. I don't know what I would do with film. That just seems really hard. Your digital camera has a million different settings. It's got a million buttons on it, dials and switches and all that. This thing has 3 settings, okay? It's got an aperture dial right here, your aperture ring on your lens. It's very intuitive. When I hold the camera up, I know exactly where it is. It's got a shutter speed dial right there at the top, and it's got an ISO dial. 3 settings, okay? It's not that hard. If you're trying to get into photography, I don't suggest going out and buying a Leica, but most of the film cameras you're going to pick up only have those 3 settings. It's very easy to use. If you're a street photographer, this would be a brilliant choice for you, because you don't have a traditional SLR viewfinder. You don't have that prism. You have actually a rangefinder patch. And I love this thing because you can see whatever comes in and out of your frame before you make the picture. So if you're trying to compose a street scene, you're walking down the street, you see somebody walking this way that you want to make a picture with, you hold the camera up and you wait for them to get in your frame, and you're able to click the picture as soon as they get in your frame. There's no guesswork involved. You just line the 2 patches up and you shoot. Another great camera for street photography, if you want something small and compact, would be the Olympus OM1. And I love this camera because it doesn't require a battery. It does require a battery for the meter, but same concept as the Leica. You've got your aperture ring right here. You've got your shutter speed ring actually on the end of your lens mount. That's a little bit different from most cameras, but I do love that it's right there at your fingertips. And you've got your ISO dial here on the top of your camera. Now, this is a very small camera, but one of the best features about it is it's got this enormous finder on the back. A lot of people bought this camera because of that. They bought it because, unlike a lot of cameras where the viewfinder was really small, it was hard to compose and focus things, especially for a camera this size, this viewfinder is enormous. And I love using it. It's got a split prism focusing screen in it right now, but I also love this camera because you can change out your focusing screens. So depending on the type of photography you do, you can actually customize this camera to work for you. Now, if you don't know what you're getting into, and you want a camera system that's going to carry you through several years or even several decades, I'd go with something like the Nikon F3, especially if you have a Nikon digital camera. One thing that's really cool about this camera is that you can use Nikon lenses from the 1950s all up to right now. If your lens comes out tomorrow, and if it has an aperture ring on it like this one does, you can put this lens on this camera. Another cool thing that's really unique about this camera is that it's very modular. You can actually take the viewfinders off of this camera and switch them out. So if you are a landscape photographer, you might use a different finder. A lot of street photographers love taking this finder off and shooting down like it has a waist level. You can actually buy a waist level finder for this camera. And nobody has to ever know you're making a picture. You don't hold it up to your eye, you just look down into it and shoot with it. One of the downsides to this camera, however, is that it does require a battery to use. The shutter doesn't work, the meter doesn't work, nothing on this camera will work if there's not a battery in it. There is, however, a fail-safe on here, on the end of this lens mount, and I think it fires at maybe a 60th of a second or maybe a 50th of a second if the battery goes dead. I don't know how much that's going to help you out in the field, but it's there just in case. Now, going back to what camera I would recommend for an amateur, a lot of students love the Canon AE1s and the AE1 programs. I started shooting professionally almost a decade ago with this camera right here. This is the Canon A1, and the same concept as the Olympus, as the Leica, as the Nikon. It has an aperture ring right here. You've got your shutter speed dial, which you can actually switch over to work with your apertures, and you've got your ISO dial here. 3 settings. That's all it is, 3 settings. There's no reason why you can't shoot film. It is the easiest thing in the world. Now, there are a lot of different options. There's thousands of different options. Go out to your local camera store, play with a few cameras, figure out which one feels best in your hands. I can't tell you what camera to buy, but I can tell you that it would do you a whole lot of good if you go out and figure out what works best for you. You want a camera that you look forward to leaving the house with every day. So just because I shoot with a Leica, or I might take an f3 with me, does not mean that that camera is going to work for you. It's not the camera that makes the picture. It's the person behind the camera that makes the picture. So trust your instincts, spend some time in your local camera store, pick up some cameras, play around with them, figure out what feels best in your hands, and go with it from there.